All right, this is going to be a quick 5-minute video. I'm going to use this flow chart to help answer the question, is it discrete, dummy, continuous, or approximately continuous? Doing some of these examples and then the quiz questions as well. So let's get started. Starting with example number 1, we have inches of rainfall in the Amazon rainforest. Would you give a numerical answer to the thing being described? Well, yeah, you could have 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, whatever. So yes, you would give a numerical answer to the number of inches of rainfall in the Amazon rainforest. Is it possible to have half of the thing being described? So that 0.5 there means half. Is it possible to have half an inch of rainfall? Yeah, sure. So for that reason, that's continuous. I'm going to go ahead and use a tool here and mark that as continuous with the letter C. C corresponding to continuous here. And let's move on to 2. Customers in HEB on a weekend. Would you describe that as being numerical? Yeah, of course. You can have 5 customers, 10 customers, 20 customers, and so on. Is it possible to have half of the thing being described? Can you have half a customer going to HEB? No, you cannot. So we're going to go down this branch here. How many reasonable values can a thing being described have? Well, customers on an HEB weekend, that could be a lot of people, right? That could be, when I think about HEB, it's a grocery store, right? It's got probably a lot of people in it on a given day. But we're talking about a weekend, we're probably talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of customers, right? So this is probably a lot of different values that this can take on. And for that reason, it's approximately continuous. We're going to give this guy D. If it helps, it might help to list some of the values you might think for the number of customers in an HEB on a weekend. So I might say it's as low as 100. Now that seems pretty low, but maybe there's a reason there's only 100 customers. Well, then if 100 is possible, so is 101, so is 102, so is 103. What are some other reasonable values? Well, like I said, if it's a grocery store on a weekend, we're probably getting up into the thousands of people going to the grocery store. So 1,000, 1,001, and this list goes on until the point where you're like, okay, there's probably no way that 1 million people went to HEB today, but somewhere between 100 and 1 million, we know that would have stopped. That list would have stopped. Is this list large? Is this a large list or a small list? Large constitutes something. It should never be so hard as to you have to guess. But I would say a few. When I say something like a few, I mean something like you can count on 1, maybe 2 hands. If I say a lot, I mean to say you can't count this on 2 hands, or you probably couldn't even use your hands into your toes to count how many different possibilities there are. And because there's hundreds of different possibilities in the number of customers on an HEB on a weekend, this is going to be approximately continuous. Okay. Gender of a newborn baby. Would you give a numerical answer to the thing described? No, you'd probably say male or female. And so with that in mind, we're going straight to this box. It's a dummy variable. So we're going to say B. Number of siblings a person has. Would you give a numerical answer to the thing described? Yes, of course. You have 1 sibling, 2 siblings, 3 siblings. Can you have half a sibling? I don't want to get into the conversation of like, oh, he's my half brother. So let's just ignore that for the time being. It's not possible to have half a brother or half a sister. So we're going to go no as well. And then how many reasonable values can the thing being described have? Well, let's see. Most people probably only have 0, 1, or 2, maybe 3 or 4 siblings. Like that's probably the full. Most people have a number of siblings in this list. Now, yes, I'm sure there are some people who have, oh yeah, I have 11 brothers and sisters. Okay, sure, that's fine. There are some people that do. But for the most part, most people either answer some number from this list. If you ask everybody in your class, how many siblings do you have? Most people would say one of these 5 numbers. And because I can count these numbers, this list of numbers on one hand, I'm going to say that it is only a few people, or only a few values that it can take on. And so for that reason, it's discrete. All right, let's try these 4 more examples. People in attendance at a professional sports event. Would you give a numerical value to that? Yes, of course. Could you have half of that thing being described? Could you have half a person in attendance? Yeah, we had 1,000.5 people in attendance. No, that's not possible. How many reasonable values can the thing being described have? When you're talking about a professional sports event, you're talking about a large, probably like a stadium-size event where you could have we'll have thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people. This is kind of just like the example with the customers in an HEB, is that if we're talking about the number of people in a stadium, a large size stadium, you could be talking about as few as 10,000 people. But then, obviously, if 10,000 is possible, so is 10,001. If 10,001 is possible, so is 10,002. And then up the way up to when, some of the largest stadiums can fit hundreds of thousands of people. So we're talking about a list that has a very, very, very large number of values that it could take on, more than you could count on one hand. And so for that reason, I'm going to say that there are a lot of different possible values, and for that, it's approximately continuous. I'm going to say D. Weight of a package that FedEx delivers. let's first go down the flow chart. Would you give a numerical answer to the thing being described? Yes, of course. You would say the weight is 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 17 pounds, whatever. Is it possible to have half a pound? Yeah, you could have half a pound. It's possible. You don't have to have a whole number of pounds. So with that in mind, this variable is continuous. Meals eaten by a person in a day. Well, let's ask yourself, how many meals do you eat in a day? Probably most people say, oh, you know what? I'm the kind of guy who skips breakfast, so I only eat lunch and dinner. Maybe I snack a bit, so I have 3. Some people, there's 3 square meals a day, but then they get, they go out on 6th Street and they get really hammered, and they're like, you know what, I want a Taco Bell right now at 1 in the morning, so we'll count that as well. Sometimes it's the lazy Sunday and you have 5 meals, and you're like, sometimes it starts to blur the line. Like, was the meal I just had a continuation of the meal I just ate? I mean, but for the most part, most people eat 2, 3, 4, 5 meals a day. Sometimes people are fasting, so you get 0 meals a day. And you might even say some people are on that, I think it's called like the Spartan diet, where they just eat a big dinner and that's all they eat for the day. So, there's probably only a small number of different values that the number of meals eaten by a person in a given day takes on, because you couldn't have tens of thousands of different values for this. There's probably just these list of 5 values, 6 values there. So for that reason, I would say there's only a few values, and so it's discrete. So it has the value A. And last one, followers on Instagram. Would you give a numerical answer to the thing being described? Yes, of course. Is it possible to have half a follower? No. How many reasonable values can the thing being described have? Well, if you're not very popular like me, you might only have something like 10, 15, 20 followers, right? But if you have 15 followers, you can have 16, 17, 18, and then you've got Instagram influencers. So we're talking people who got 10,000 followers, but then you get up to celebrities like the Kardashians or The Rock, and they've got hundreds of millions of followers. And so this list is massive. This is not a list that you could count on one hand. So with that in mind, this would be approximately continuous. Let's look at, I'm going to kind of reference the quiz now and talk about some problems that are in that. Going to be going through the flow chart while I do it as well. So the first one from the quiz, I don't know if I have these in the right order. I think I do. It says number of deliveries Amazon makes to residences in the United States. Imagine you have data for many days. So obviously that would be a numerical answer. We're going to go down. Let's do this in purple this time. So I would say yes. You would describe with a number of deliveries, and I think it even says number in the question. Let me move my screen so I can see this at the same time I'm drawing. Okay. Is it possible to have half of the thing being described? Could you have half a delivery? No, you couldn't. You couldn't have, this Amazon made 22.5 deliveries a day. How many reasonable values can the thing being described have? It's probably going to be a lot, right? If we're talking about Amazon, they're a large retailer, large box retailer. They're delivering hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of packages in a given day, and that list is going to be very large. So for that reason, number one is going to be approximately continuous. Time it takes for a personal shopper in H-E-B store to pull a customer's order from the shelves. Numerical answer, yes, time is a numerical value. Is it possible to have half of the thing being described? Well, first off, you might want to ask yourself, how might you measure time? Well, that might be measured in minutes or seconds or hours. So let's say minutes. Is it possible to have half a minute? Of course, it is possible to have half a minute. It's possible to have a minute, quarter minute, tenth of a minute, any fraction of a minute is possible. So for that reason, 2 is continuous. Antibody test showing whether a person previously had coronavirus. Okay. Would you describe that as numerical? Maybe the antibody test is testing how many antibodies that person has in some sort of medically quantifiable way. But the key word here, the one word that really spells out whether this is going to be a dummy variable or not, is the word whether. Weather just means, you're in the English language, we know that the word whether means yes or no. Like we know the outcomes, either it did happen or it didn't happen. So because it says whether, it's indicating that the test was either positive or negative. The test indicates the person has the antibodies or doesn't. So for that reason, this is not a numerical answer. This is a dummy variable. The result is either positive or negative. Okay. Number of semesters an undergraduate took courses before graduating with a bachelor's degree. Let's see. Even the most ambitious student probably couldn't graduate with a bachelor's in sooner than 6 semesters. You know that some people like, I had a buddy who graduated in 3 years. Maybe he brought in credits from taking AP exams and whatnot. So he said, what, I'm down to get through college as fast as possible to get my bachelor's degree in 6 semesters. Cool. Most people take 8. but some people still graduate early and graduate in 3.5 years. Some people drop a couple classes or are doing a master's, or well, I guess not a master's, but they're working toward a larger degree that needs a bigger body of work, or maybe they are an engineer. They space their courses out over a longer period of time. So I would say most people fit into this list here. Probably, if you ask most people, how many semesters did you take before you graduated? Most, or graduated with a bachelor's degree, most people would answer with a number in this list. And because this is such a small list, I haven't really bothered going down my tree here, but yes, it's numerical. Is it possible to have half a semester? We're going to say no. We're not going to say, yeah, I took 3.2 semesters. That doesn't make sense. Or 3.5 semesters. That doesn't make sense. You either completed your semester or you didn't. And then there's not a lot of values here. There's only 6 or 7 that I listed, just 7. And you could add maybe a few more. You can maybe say there's someone who got their bachelor's in 4 or 5 semesters, but still there's not a lot of values in this list. I can count all these numbers on both hands. And so for that reason, I would say there's only a few. And for that reason, it's discrete. Okay, let's back up a bit. Oops, backed up too much. Okay, let's look at the next one. We've got miles driven in a privately owned car or SUV. Okay, so would you give a numerical answer? Sure, miles is a number. So we're gonna have a miles is measured, or distance is measured with miles. Is it possible to have half a mile? Sure, of course, you can have half a mile. So with that in mind, it's automatically continuous. Obviously, for these kind of questions, I hope that you're seeing a theme kind of emerge, is that these first 2 questions are pretty easy to answer. It is this last question that people mess up the most, is just making the distinction between approximately continuous and discrete. Okay, let's look at the next 5. Whether or not a person had a flu vaccine. Well, there's that word whether. So that already dummy variable. Again, if you had whether or not you have the flu vaccine, it's yes or no. You either have it or you do not. Number of calls received by the liberal arts instructional technology help desk in a day. This one's kind of tough because I don't know. You have to know something about the liberal arts instructional technology help desk, and I don't know anything about them. I mean, maybe it's, I'm assuming it's for the University of Texas, so we're talking, it's a big university. Liberal arts is a big college at the university, and you probably have a lot of people having technical issues with their Wi-Fi, with or not. This is instructional technologies. Maybe it's Wi-Fi. Maybe it's setting up Zoom, right? Because instructional technology is probably the Zoom call that you watch when you're taking a lecture. But not only do you have people having trouble watching Zoom lecture or giving Zoom lectures, but also people having trouble with them. So you probably get a lot of calls to that call center. But before we start answering questions about how many come in, let's go ahead and go down our flowchart. Yeah, number of calls would be numerical. Is it possible to have half a phone call? No. And then how many reasonable values can the thing being described have? So again, this is hard because I don't know what the liberal arts instructional technology call center is like. Is it hectic? Is it slow going? I'm guessing that for a large university and a large college like the liberal arts college, it's probably going to be a large number of values that on a given day you could have as few as 5, but as many as 100. And so with that in mind, that's a big list of numbers, and I would say it's approximately continuous. Hopefully I'm not mistaken about that, but that seems reasonable to me, that when you're talking about a call centers get a lot of calls. That's the whole point, is to get field calls from people who need help and then answer them. And you probably have sometimes you're lucky and get as few as 10 people who need help. Sometimes you're unlucky and get as many as 100 people in a given day that need help. Okay, weight of gold mined in Peru. Was that what it said? Peru. Weight of gold mined in Peru. Okay, so imagine you have, weight, would you measure that numerically? Yeah, of course. You would say 5 pounds, 10 pounds, whatever. Is it possible to have half of a thing being described? Yeah, you could have half a pound. And so for that reason, it is continuous. All right. Number of small scale gold miners in Peru. So this goes on to say illegal, informal, and artisanal miners. And imagine you have annual data for many years. We're talking about Peru. That's an entire country of probably with millions of people. And with that in mind, I would probably say there's probably lots of different lots of gold miners, and that list probably fluctuates from year to year. So we have annual data for many years. If we're talking about the number of years since 1900, say, we're looking at about 120 years worth of data. And if we were to count the number of gold miners, it fluctuates quite a bit. So, and that list is going to be really large. I don't think it's a small list of gold miners. Plus, you have gold miners that die off, people entering the trade, and so that number probably fluctuates a lot to where I wouldn't say the list is a small list of numbers. So I would say it's numerical. It's not possible to have half a gold miner, and I would say there's a lot of different gold miners, especially when you're talking about a large country such as Peru. If you were to talk about a small village in Peru, how many gold miners are there? That would probably be discrete because you're probably talking about, let's say we've got 100 people living in that village. Well, you probably only have 1 or 2 or 3 gold miners at any given time, and that's a small list. But if we're talking about the entire country of Peru, well, in that case, you're probably talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of gold miners, and that list fluctuates year after year. This next one's also pretty difficult, but I think I've figured this one out. Number of franchises a Subway franchisee has. Imagine you have data from many Subway franchisees. So franchisee, I don't know if you guys know how the franchising system works, but you can buy a Subway franchise. It means you basically buy the branding of Subway and the store front and sell the sandwiches out of the store, and you keep a percentage of profits, but some percentage of your profits go to Subway. Now, with that in mind, if you wanted to do that, how many stores do you think you might have? So let's just consider how many Subways are in Austin. I don't even know. Let me look that up real quick. I'm going to go to Google Maps and say, how many Subways are in Austin right now? It looks to be kind of on the order of 20-ish, kind of 20. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean all 20 are owned by the same franchisee. It's possible that, a couple of them are probably owned by the same franchisee. It's possible that maybe 3 are owned by the same franchisee. But I doubt that if you have a Subway franchise, it's unlikely that you have many more. So first off, let's count the numbers of Subway franchises I would have, or most people have. That's 0. Then you get people who have 1 Subway franchise and they're happy having that 1. Cool. That's probably most people. Most people probably fit in the category of having 0 or 1 Subway franchise. But then you probably have a few people like, you know what, Subway's been good to me. I'll open up another franchise store over in this area. Maybe I'll open up another and another. But I'm doing good that I don't need more than 4. This list of numbers is so small that I wouldn't say this is a large list. And so with that in mind, I would say it's discrete. Let's go run down the tree. It's a numerical thing. Yep, you either have 0, 1, 2, 3 franchises. Can you have half a franchise? No, you cannot have half a franchise. How many reasonable values can the thing being described have? I would say a few. I would say that in terms of people who own a franchise, a Subway franchise, or a Subway store, it's probably, of those who own one, I would say they probably don't own more than 1, 2, 3, or 4. Like, I don't think this list goes on to say, yes, I'm the Subway like Subway oil baron, and I have 2,000 Subway franchises across. That's not likely. Most people only have either 0, 1, 2, or 3, or 4. And with that in mind, I would say it's discrete. Okay, hopefully you guys found this video useful. I lied at the very beginning. I must have said it was going to be 5 minutes, and it looks like this has been more like 20. But a few of the things I want to say is that I might already mention this. This is the easiest quiz. If you found this difficult, understandably, I'm sure that most of you found this part difficult, distinguishing between approximately continuous and discrete. If you found this difficult, just wait, it gets worse. This is going to be a hard class, but I'm here to be doing quiz reviews like this one to help you through it and help you understand all the material going on in the class. We'll be doing the next one in a week for quiz 2, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys next time.